Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Because it's Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, practically, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week, usually. But I missed it last week, Roger. I missed it. So I'm going to have to pick an extra great comic book this week, and I sure did. I picked this legendary comic book, which is Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, when he turns into the Giant Turtle Man. Now this, for my more sensitive viewers, beware, this is a very frightening and disturbing story where Jimmy Olsen once again turns into a terrifying creature. This is something that just happened a lot, Roger. It happened a lot with poor Jimmy. Now you could find this story in this awesome collection, Superman Family, the Giant Turtle Man. This is one of the DC Finest volumes, a fantastic series of reprint volumes from DC Comics. And this is titled The Giant Turtle Man because this is Jimmy Olsen's most famous story. It's an epic of horror and science fiction. It's an epic. And this was written by Jerry Siegel, I believe. Let me just double check. I don't want to be wrong about that. Yeah, okay. This was written by Jerry Siegel, the co-creator of Superman. And the artist is, well, the penciler is the greatest Superman artist of all time, probably, which is Curt Swan. It was inked, this story, by John Fort. So we have Curt Swan, we have Jerry Siegel, and we have this legendary story, which was inspired probably by this pulp magazine cover, as you can see. They're very similar, and I think Curt Swan, is probably the one that got the inspiration, but I'm not certain. I'm not exactly sure of the story behind this, the relationship between these two stories, but clearly this pulp magazine was the inspiration for this cover here, and probably the Giant Turtle Man himself. It's an awesome piece of artwork. Unfortunately, I don't know who created it because I'm dumb and I didn't look it up before I started filming this. That's how you go, That's how it goes on this channel. But yeah, definitely this inspired the legendary Giant Turtle Man. So yeah, there's that. And truly a tale of terror where Jimmy Olsen, who's constantly causing trouble and getting into magical adventures or super scientific adventures, and very often turning into something terrifying. Now, I did promise to talk about this story months ago when I did the adventure where Jimmy Olsen turned into a horrifying werewolf. That was pretty terrifying as well. But this is his most legendary story. So let's talk about this story. Let me find it. Let me find this story. It's in here somewhere. Here it is. It's right here. So let's begin the tale. Here's this awesome giant panel where Superman is swooping down, and there's Jimmy Olsen stuffing ships and things into an active volcano. Why is he doing this? Well, let's read on and find out. Great Scott! Why is Jimmy stuffing that volcano crater with a battleship? What on earth is his huge, twisted turtle mind up to? That's a good question. We find out in this titanic, amazing story, which starts off on the deck of a ship as Jimmy, Lois Lane, and Clark Kent are all lounging around. One sunny morning, as Daily Planet reporters, Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen enjoy a 10-day vacation trip to the West Indies. So they were all on vacation together. Isn't that cool? They're such good friends that they all take vacations together. And later on at the dock, Jimmy is all fascinated by this big magnet, which is picking up a bunch of metal trash. And Lois Lane's like, I'm going to go do something fun while you look at the trash. Now, Clark Kent just wants to hang out on the ship Clearly, he has some Superman things to do. But Jimmy Olsen doesn't know anything about that. So Jimmy says, meet me on the beach later, Lois. I want to do some beach combing. So he's wandering around on the beach. And wouldn't you know it, he stumbles upon this strange chest which is washed up on the beach from the ocean. Now you would think by now that Jimmy Olsen, as soon as he saw a mysterious chest, would just say, you know what, no thanks. No, I've had enough. Because Jimmy Olsen is always coming across stuff like this, and it always turns him into something strange or sends him in time or something like that. You would think at this point, Jimmy Olsen would be like, you know what, I'm just going to walk around it and continue on my way. But no, he can't do it. He's filled with curiosity. So he breaks open the chest, and it's a strange gun of some sort. It's like a gun. So what do you do when you find a strange device, a strange gun? Why, you shoot it, of course. That's the first thing you do. You just shoot it. In this case, he shoots it at a snail, which turns giant. That's right. This is a ray that turns things giant. And he turned he turns this snail giant, and it just wanders off into the ocean, probably to cause some great destruction. We don't know, Roger. We don't know what happened to the snail, because that's the last we see of it. He probably wandered into some horror comic book where the giant snail was like a feature attraction. But we don't know. It's not in this comic book anymore. And he does the same thing to a sponge, and he makes a giant sponge. And then Lois is like, you know what? Maybe you should stop enlarging things with this mysterious ray you just found. You don't know where it's from. You just stop shooting at every place. And he's like, you're right, Lois. Maybe I should stop doing that. So later on, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen are hanging out. And you remember that giant magnet that was like lifting off trash off the ship? I don't know why they had so much trash to lift off, but they did. Anyway, he wanders by the magnet, and it automatically sends out a message to Superman, because his Superman watch, his watch that contacts Superman, just went off, As will happen when you walk by a giant magnet, it'll send a signal to Superman. Now, Clark Kent has left the ship earlier, and he said, I have reporter things to do. And so he just left because he had to go do stuff in outer space as Superman. But wouldn't you know it, every time he tries to do something for work, his superhero work, he gets a call from Jimmy. You think he would take the signal watch away from him, but he doesn't. So he's like, God damn it, it's Jimmy again. So he goes down to the ship, and he says, you know what, I'm sorry, I sent that signal off by accident. And he's like, you know what, Lois told me all about this enlarger ray that you found. Don't mess with it, all right? Just don't mess with the enlargement ray. Anything could happen. And he's like, sure, Superman, I won't mess with the ray. Why would I do a thing like that? So Jimmy, of course, continues to mess around with it. And accidentally, his hand slips. I think that's exactly what it says. Oh my gosh, Lois, my hand slipped, and I pushed the switch on the enlarging ray. It's passing through the turtle and hitting me, because he found a turtle. And he was just playing around with the turtle right next to the enlarging ray. No sense of safety, this guy. And the ray passes through the turtle and hits him. The turtle becomes gigantic and just jumps off the ship. Again, we never hear what happens to the turtle after this. It just wanders off, probably to kill hundreds of people in a gigantic turtle rage. You never know, Roger. Another gigantic monster created by Jimmy Olsen. But in the process, much like the film The Fly, Jimmy Olsen is turned into a half turtle, half man from this horrible ray. And he becomes a giant turtle man, and he leaves the ship so he doesn't destroy it. But then he becomes a giant monster, and he's wandering around, and he busts up this bridge. And this is, of course, the great scene that we saw on the cover of the comic book. And he's tearing up the bridge, and he takes all of the metal and starts stuffing it into an active volcano. Why is he doing this? We don't know. but that's what he's doing. So he's going around and he's finding all the metal he can. Unfortunately, that happens to be ships. So he's finding all of these ships. And these are empty ships, right? So he finds these empty ships, one would hope. One hopes that they're not full of human beings. And he dumps the ships into the active volcano, and he keeps doing this. Eventually, he comes across a battleship, and this is a great picture right there of the battleship fighting the now invulnerable giant turtle man. Now, Superman, he comes back to the ship, and he hears about this. "Thank goodness you came back, Superman," says Lois. "By accident, Jimmy became enlarged by that weird ray. He's become a menace. We just got a flash that he seized a battleship." "Yes, Lois, I just spotted him with my telescopic vision. He's about to drop it into the crater of a volcano. I'll head for the island now." And so he flies and sees Jimmy, and he says, "Jimmy, you young fool, why didn't you listen to me? Why did you tamper with that ray?" So, he's berating Giant Turtle Man. Now, we only have a couple pages left for the epic conclusion of this story. I know, it's gone by too quick, And so Superman just decks him. He just decks the Giant Turtle Man and knocks him unconscious. That's all it took. Bam. He's Superman. He could throw planets around. I guess Giant Turtle Man didn't have much of a chance. And then he lifts Giant Turtle Man by his giant underwear. Now, oddly enough, earlier in the story, Jimmy mentioned that the ray only works on living tissue. I'm pretty sure he mentioned that. But somehow his underwear became giant as well. He just got giant underwear. That's how it happens in these old stories. Now, all of a sudden, Lori Lamaris shows up. Now, Lori, the mermaid that Superman used to be in love with, shows up and explains that this is all the result of a merman, Zoxo. Zoxo, the merman scientist from Atlantis, has created this ray. And he did it so he can gain control of somebody dumb enough to do something that like what Jimmy did. And his whole scheme was to cover this island where the active volcano is with molten steel, which would harden into steel. So he wants to cover this island with the volcano on it in steel. And the reason he wants to do this, this is all very logical, Roger. He thinks, Goxo, is because there is a treasure on this island, and he doesn't want anyone to find it. So he covers the whole island with steel, and the only way he could figure to do this is to create an enlarging ray, to create a huge being and control the being so that he drops ships into the volcano to make steel that would... This seems kind of like a dumb idea now that I've said it out loud. It made perfect sense when I was reading it. And indeed, Superman finds the treasure when he peels up the steel, which has covered the island. Meanwhile, Jimmy Olsen has turned back into his normal self, and his rampage of destruction is now over. And the saga of the Giant Turtle Man has come to a close. I know, isn't that amazing? That was an amazing, incredible story. As you can see, Jimmy Olsen gets into all kinds of adventures, It's just one thing after another with Jimmy Olsen. And this story, actually, I don't think I mentioned it. This adventure, The Giant Turtle Man, was in Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen number 53, which first appeared in June of 1961. This is a very 1961 kind of story. Now, this is the most famous Jimmy Olsen story of all. He did return as the Giant Turtle Man once or twice, because you can't keep a good Giant Turtle Man down. I'm hoping that this story wasn't too terrifying for my viewers. I know it's pretty horrifying and disturbing, the giant turtle man. Try not to have nightmares. I will come up with something much tamer next week, you know. Just something nice and tame, Roger. Something not quite so scary. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.